Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be here. And thanks for the introduction. And indeed, I have been a member of government, I've been a member of parliament for many years, but I have also been an academic at different universities, and among them this university, the Vrije Universiteit. So it's very good to be back home, in a way, for me, and to talk to you about science and the role of governments in science. And by doing that, I can speak from my heart. And I want to share some experiences among Dutch scientists and the way I treat them as a minister. 3 years ago, a team of Dutch medical researchers published a paper in an American scientific journal. And following a comprehensive study in intensive care units, they found an effective measure to counteract resistance to antibiotics. Their research had the potential to drastically improve care for the most vulnerable of hospitals' patients. And they were deservedly proud of their accomplishment. But then something went wrong. Last year, the study leader received a startling phone call. Her name is Evelien Oostdijk. She had recently received a PhD and was working as an intensive care resident. And one of her successors in the PhD program was calling to mention that fellow researchers had detected something strange. They had found a discrepancy between raw data collected at the time and the results in the published article. Suddenly, nothing was certain. Evelien Oostdijk and her team decided to act. They made all their data available for reanalysis and then ran the analysis again. There had indeed been a mistake, a simple, routine slip-up in an Excel sheet. The new analysis showed a small but clear differences that can in fact save even more lives. Oostdijk immediately got in touch with all Dutch specialists who had benefited from the study. And she contacted the medical journal that published their paper, asking them to withdraw the previous article and replace it with the amended version. This version was published last month. The study team was praised for their openness in view of their vulnerability in admitting the error and making their data available for reanalysis. Some even called Evelien Oostdijk a shining example of scientific integrity, and rightly so. So this is what integrity in science can do. It can even lead to better results than you ever expected. I'm telling this story because it's such a positive example. So when we speak about integrity, we generally know full well what we do not want: fraud, hostility, distrust, tunnel vision, prejudice. But to me, it is important that both researchers and governments have a clear vision of the kind of science we do want. When done properly, scientific research gives humanity what it needs most: facts on which to build our lives and our society. Without facts, society is plagued by uncertainty. Without facts, there can be no policy, no dot on the horizon, and no stability. Therefore, our search for facts must be held to the highest standards of honesty, openness, and vulnerability, of collaboration, of asking questions, and of peer review. A moral compass, trustworthy and true, is the most important precondition to any scientific study. These high standards, ladies and gentlemen, are our best answer to those who doubt the value of independent scientific endeavor. When alternative facts suddenly gain widespread support, or when climate change is dismissed as a hoax. Clearly, lies should always be refuted. And that's why I joined one of the many marches for science last month here in Amsterdam, together with many scientists from Dutch and international universities. It is important that we, as members of government, speak out for free and independent science, together with the scientists themselves. It's important that any move to restrict this freedom, that we try to avoid that, because any move makes us less human. It diminishes our ability to search for facts, our ability to truly understand who we are and how we can create a better world. And it is the responsibility of governments to practice politics based on science, and never to influence science based on politics. Governments should be held accountable by scientists who show their moral compass and who actively involve society in their work. This is why I am so proud of another Dutch researcher, Bernice Notenboom. She and her international colleagues recently conducted a climate study at the North Pole for NASA, and she was sure to get the business community involved. She invited major Dutch companies to visit her and to show them what's going on. And in doing so, she forged a link between abstract fundamental research and global challenges. And she made science relevant to our daily lives. And she was completely transparent, showing us the high standards of her research. This engenders confidence. We must cherish this confidence. And to do so, we need openness about methods and funding, about data and about results, and about assumptions and mistakes. And this only works if your moral compass comes from within. No government can ever force it. But as a minister, I can assure a lively and ongoing debate to keep us vigilant. And we in the Netherlands have done just that in the last few years through our national science vision made by the government, together with the scientific community transferred and translated in a specific science agenda. We stimulated the code of conducts and also to update them. So there are some things we can do as a government. And it's also important to me that we continually compare our own standards to these in other countries. After all, a moral compass needs peer review too. You have to be open about dilemmas and about your quest for integrity. Only then can we strengthen research and the culture of science worldwide, thus enhancing political and public confidence in the search for facts. For example, anyone can find the ancillary positions of Dutch professors on the websites of their university, so that anyone can see whether they are affiliated with another company or organization. And this is precisely what I ask you to share your dilemmas. Cast your net wide. Share them not just with your colleagues, but also with your partners in education and government, and with the business community, with young and old. Inspire all of society with a moral compass that you keep calibrated and true. And inspire the younger generations to embrace science and follow in your footsteps. Your moral compass can be a shining example to others, so that science will remain at the front of social progress. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm tremendously proud of Evelien Oostdijk and her team, and of all her peers who are equally open and vulnerable. As a former researcher, I have seen and felt the risks and vulnerabilities involved in the pursuit of science. Scientific endeavor is and will always remain a human endeavor. There is nothing wrong with making mistakes. And this is exactly why science capacity for self-regulation is one of the jewels in the crown of humanity. One of the most basic facts of humanity is that we will never be infallible. But be that as it may, we can always discover and improve. Never in splendid isolation, but always as part of a community, with utter honesty and candor. The potential for self-improvement is indeed the very source of the scientific quest to look higher and to reach further. As Isaac Newton said, if I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. Researchers who are not only committed to finding new facts, but whose standards reach higher and higher, and whose moral compass leads them on the path of veracity and integrity, these are the giants on whose shoulders we stand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Would you be willing to answer questions? Are there any questions? If so, please go to the microphones. But maybe I could start by saying, do you think there's a role for government in legislating about the conduct of research?
You know, there might be a role for government to improve a code of conduct made by scientists. But I'm very hesitant to involve, as a minister, very directly in the field of science. As I said in my speech, I think it's the self-reflection, it's the peer review of scientists who have to do them themselves. You know, maybe I'm a minister, I hope I might say, with a heart for science, since I have been a researcher myself. But who knows who will be my successor and will be next? So I think any involvement, direct involvement by a government, by a minister in science, creates also great risks. So I should say the government should be on distance, but if the community themselves create a code of conduct, appointments, as we did with a standard evaluation protocol about how you measure results in science. It was made by the research community, but they handed it over to me. And by doing that, I also made it mine. So then you broaden up the community, but you do not directly influence the community of science, but you approve some of the appointments you make.
So you're giving it that authority, but it's coming
Yes.
bottom up.
Yes, that's the right, you give it more authority,
Yeah.
And you also say, I want to use it myself, and it's also what I want to have as appointments with the researchers we deal with, and who get funding from the government.
Please.
Thank you very much, Minister. My name is Tamarine de Haven. I'm a PhD student here at the Vrije Universiteit. And my question to you is, I very much enjoyed the talk and specifically how you emphasized our moral compass. My question would be, what can the government do to show, specifically for young scientists, that she really wants us to foster this moral compass?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What I can do is to stimulate universities and the supervisors of PhD students to develop this moral compass. So, you know, I always say that, you know, in fact, not only PhD students, but I think all students, bachelor and master students, should know that they have a very big responsibility to deal with all the knowledge you gather as a scientist, and that you have to use it in a proper way. So I think to talk about it and to stimulate and to give yourself the good example is very important for supervisors to learn young scientists to be open, to be transparent. And that's why I gave the example of Evelien Oostdijk, that you can even perform better by being transparent and by showing your mistakes.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, Chris Harkering from Tilburg University, the Netherlands. I have a question that relates to open data and also the use allowed by the government. I'm very much a proponent of open data, but there is now legislation that's open for consultancy that the arrest material from hospital procedures, for example, blood donations and such, would also be able to be used by the security services in criminal investigations. And that seems to me to undermine the integrity of research in a way. So would you be able to comment a bit about the ideas behind that with respect to research integrity and that legislation?
Wow, that's a difficult question. Generally speaking, I'm very much in favor of open data because I think, as was just being said, but that open data helps us to keep each other sharp in a way, to deal the knowledge we have. And even most of the knowledge is prepared with public funding, so it's very important that everyone can use it. But your question about arrest materials, it's maybe more an ethical question than a question of open science. Science should be as open as possible. But, you know, there will always be knowledge in our defense structure and police investigations that is not open for a big audience. So, but then we have to test the arguments and to be sure that these arguments allow these data not to be open. And that's maybe for every exclusion of open data, we have to create a set of arguments and to be sure that that we do not make this kind of information open for all.
Thank you.
But it seems like the security services would then get a crowbar to open the data, right? Because it seems to be closed by first instance, but then open to specific services.
Yeah, but then again, the question is there another opportunity? Or is this the only way to open some of the information for some groups? Because it's very important in the fight against terrorism or in police investigations. So I can think of examples that I would say it's allowed to open it for a special group. But then we should think about the arguments. Why is this an exception to open data? And I would always say and argue that open data is the message, and you can have exceptions, but then you have to argue why this should be an exception.
Thank you.
And of course, you are elected to monitor that.
Yes, of course. So you also have to evaluate, is this the right process we are making all together? And again, that is something we have to do with scientists and governments themselves.
One last question, please.
Michael Wise from University of Western Australia and COPE. You've talked about the moral compass, and yes, that's the bottom of everything we do, really. But I want to look at the other side of it, the flip side of the coin, which is when the compass breaks. Do you see a role of the law in dealing with severe cases? In other jurisdictions, I don't know what's happened here, but in other jurisdictions, research malpractice has actually been treated as a legal issue and people have been hauled before the courts. Do you see that as a useful role? You know,
that should be really last resort. And of course, everything starts with a moral compass. But I emphasize this because many people think that a minister will make laws at the first place, or is thinking in institutional frameworks. And my point is that an institutional framework or any legal measure does not make any sense if it does not stimulate the moral compass. Because, you know, then it's something within the institutions, but then it does not relate to daily work of scientists. So my preference is not only moral compass, but also self-regulation by scientists themselves. And we also have in the Netherlands a couple of organizations where people can go if they think that one of their colleagues did something wrong. And then it's our scientists themselves who will investigate in the issue. And I think that's a better way because it's peer review, it is by the experts, and it's not by any formal institutional framework. But of course but I would say, again, that should be exceptions. If you misuse your work of science in such a way that you really harm directly a group of other citizens, yes, then maybe it's not only because it should always be an issue of the community of science itself. But then if you harm others directly, yeah, then it might be a case for the law. Okay.
Thank you very much, Minister.